All right. Looks like we're rolling.
Fantastic. Thanks, Steve. Welcome, everybody, to today's webinar. It is the third and final webinar in our networking series on industrial computing and managed services. We will be recording this and sending it out to all attendees, as well as the slides and any other material that you see today. The other two webinars you can find on our HESCO YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and just type in HESCO ASG, you should be able to find us. And those two previous recordings cover network design and then cybersecurity. So go on, check those out if you haven't looked at them before. With that, I'd like to introduce everybody to Steve Hartsfeld and Sheldon Brown of Rockwell Automation. Steve and Sheldon are the business development leads for Connected Services. Guys, it's all you.
Thank you so much, Chad. Appreciate it. Good morning again, folks. And thanks again for Chad and Angela for having me back again today. I'm looking forward to talking to you this morning. Just a brief introduction in case you weren't tuned in the last, 2 weeks ago, I guess, webinar. My name is Stephen Hartsfeld. I work for Rockwell Automation in our Connected Services business. Only been with Rockwell about 4 months, but I've been involved with industrial automation in some way, shape, or form for the last 12 and a half years, focusing on industrial networks and security and smart manufacturing for the last 4. I'm also lucky enough to be joined by a very special guest, Sheldon Brown, also from our Connected Services business. And Sheldon brings some valuable experience around industrial computing and managed services, among other things. So Sheldon, if you want to introduce yourself, go ahead.
Sure. Thanks, Steve. Sheldon Brown. I'm also one of the business development leads with our Connected Services business. I've been with Rockwell 7.5 years now. I've spent most of my time actually in the Connected Services business, and in a previous life, previous to the current role I'm in, I was actually one of the consultants that went out and delivered our primary virtualization solution in the industrial data center. So I'm hoping to, along with Steve, share some insights with you guys today.
Thanks, Sheldon. And I'm really thrilled that you could join us. So very briefly, who are we as Rockwell Automation? Rockwell is a global company. We're doing business in over 80 countries, more than 20,000 employees, and almost $7 billion in annual sales, which makes us the largest company in the world dedicated to industrial automation. And we have been helping companies deploy and manage control networks and compute solutions for decades, with the aim of bringing the connected enterprise to fruition. So as we've talked about in our previous conversations, manufacturing companies are facing an array of challenges. And some of the big ones are the skills gap. We've got those experienced personnel that are getting near to retirement age and taking that tribal knowledge with them. And it's a challenge to pass along that knowledge to the younger generation. And it's a challenge to even find the younger generation of employees to come and backfill those roles. Without that staffing, it can be very difficult to meet the goals that you've set for yourselves, the productivity, effectiveness goals. Inflexibility, another big challenge. A lot of manufacturing companies have been, I don't want to say behind the 8 ball, but have been slow to adopt some risk management processes in the OT space. Often they don't have the tools to manage their infrastructure. They might struggle from having a significant amount of data or data sources, but an inability to transform that data into something actionable, into that information and into that knowledge about their process. Convergence, certainly very common that plants don't have a comprehensive asset inventory, so they struggle to manage their life cycles, and they can't protect or even effectively manage what they don't know is there or what they can't see. And certainly are struggling to integrate new technologies, especially in this sort of manufacturing-focused software solution space, which we're going to talk about. And vulnerability, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago. Security in OT is often an afterthought, even if it's even a thought at all. A lot of times we see plants that are relying on obsolete gear that doesn't get updates any longer, no security patches. run into a lot of situations where plants don't have a security policy or any procedures in the event of a breach. And because the OT environment is very static, we expect the machines and the components to last decades, not years. It's a challenge to stay abreast of the security landscape, which is highly dynamic. Now, there are solutions in this space in particular that can do a really nice job in addressing all these challenges. For example, with an industrial data center and managed services, which we'll talk about in more detail, you can effectively address a lack of personnel that are capable of effectively managing your manufacturing applications and the server platforms on which they operate. With virtualization, you can become much more flexible by separating the previously unavoidable link between your computing hardware and the applications you need to run, not to mention by making moving or recovering your applications light years faster and much easier. And it'll set you up for success in terms of convergence with IT by leveraging platforms that IT professionals are comfortable with, and you'll be effectively locking down your critical applications when you deploy a solution like a secure virtualization platform or an industrial data center. When we talk about manufacturing applications, what are we referring to? It's a pretty loose definition. It could mean your SCADA server, could mean a thin client management and content delivery system like Thin Manager, could mean a data repository like a Historian, an asset management tool like Asset Center, a threat detection tool, reporting platform. There's so many different applications that you can leverage nowadays to make your company or your plant or even your line or machine more effective and therefore more competitive. And many of these platforms require, or at the very least recommend, that they run on a server OS as opposed to a normal workstation operating system that you have on your desktop or your laptop computer. And so when you go to deploy a system like this, who owns it? Right? If OT or operational technology, plant floor folks own it, do they have the competency or the bandwidth to stay on top of the maintenance and the administration? If IT is going to manage it, do they understand the different requirements and challenges that the OT environment faces? And it's not an email server that'll cause grumbling and inconvenience if it's down for an hour. If we lose these applications, there's a great chance that we won't be able to run the plant, and it'll end up costing a significant amount of money or worse. And in both of these scenarios, is the ownership of this system the fourth, fifth, 10th hat that a person is wearing? Is this system one of their primary responsibilities that they can devote time and resources to? Or is it a science project or a collateral duty that they'll get around to when they have time or when it fails completely? And if no one owns it, is it going to sit in a room unpatched and unsecured, waiting to be compromised? And then regardless of who owns the system, how's it going to be deployed? Are we going to go old school and install the applications right on the host OS of the server, the host operating system? So, what if that server fails? Is there a backup? How quickly could you recover? What if we have different applications with different operating system or different resource requirements? Are we going to deploy those applications on separate boxes? So those questions, among others, are what lead modern manufacturing companies to deploy their applications in the virtual environment. But deploying oftentimes redundant virtualized solutions on your own can be very time consuming, can be difficult, costly, and risky. We estimate, for example, that a small platform capable of, say, 10 to 20 virtual machines, you'll spend over $20,000 on the hardware itself, almost $15,000 on virtualization software, on average 80 hours of time working with vendors to design and verify the architecture, 16 hours to configure the software, and on average to 120 hours of maintenance work that adds up very, very quickly. And this is for a small system. If you have a medium to large facility and you want to house all your critical applications here, we're talking about much more time, more money, and risk. So with that, I'm excited to hand it over to Sheldon, who's going to talk for a while about virtualization and what we can do to address these challenges and turn them into opportunities to make our facilities more effective, more profitable, and more competitive. Go ahead.
All righty. So the first thing we really want to start off here is defining what virtualization is. And essentially, virtualization is breaking the link between the operating system and the physical hardware. So essentially, this would be thinking if you look at your laptop, the operating system that you're probably running is probably Windows 10. That's tied to your hardware. Usually, when that hardware dies, what do? We all go get a new laptop. Here, what we're trying to do is tie that dependency of those two, or take that tie between those two and break it. And when we break it, that allows us to have higher speed in terms of replacement. It allows us to consolidate our footprint so we don't have 10 different computers sitting out on the facility that are running applications. Now we can run all of those in one location. We also are going to increase our application longevity. And by that, I mean, we all now know that Windows 7 is no longer supported by Microsoft. That being said, we're running in the OT facility. Sometimes we have applications that they need some of these legacy operating systems to be able to run. We can't upgrade them now. We may have plans to upgrade them in the future, but for the short term, we need them to run. So being able to, once again, have these in a virtual environment gives you the flexibility of, one, it's not tied to older hardware, and two, also for security, you can lock that specific system down. Next slide. So why would you want to virtualize? So some of the same things that I mentioned before. So one, simplified management. When you bring all those, when you bring your footprint in closer and make it smaller, it makes it one central place to manage everything instead of going out individually to each PC or computer. This also allows, in terms from a user and group management standpoint, now that we've brought it into this central management, it makes it much easier to manage our users from one single location instead of our scattered locations. Being able to accelerate both deployment and repair are huge. As you saw in the example that Steve gave earlier, it takes some time to build and construct architectures for these types of solutions, and being able to then go out and deploy them sometimes can take 6 months up to a year, depending on the organization and the IT department. With us, luckily, we've been able to develop a standard solution that helps with that deployment to make it faster. And in terms of repair, being able to have the level of redundancy in your virtualization solution that you can repair on the fly and not cause downtime is critical. So once again, high availability, being able to have that redundancy, one, like I said, to do repairs, but also to do updates, especially critical security updates that are now more important than ever. And also being able to have some sort of backup solution. Virtualization actually gives us an easy way to do backup solutions as well. So when we look into, next slide. So when we look into, easy steps to get into virtualization, here at Rockwell, we've been able to narrow it down to 4. So what we've done is we will first help you identify some of your challenges. Actually, in the next slide, I'll get into some common challenges that we see with our customers, but we'll help you identify your challenges. And then we'll define the infrastructure requirements. And by that, what existing applications are you putting on there? What are you doing for the future? And also your existing network architecture. Where would this actually sit in the architecture? Just to make sure everything fits, and once again, we make this a seamless deployment. The next thing we do is we then provide our turnkey solution, which includes the hardware, software, and configuration services. And then after that, we have a couple different levels of support that we provide. The managed support is what we are focused on today. That will help you with that reliability to make sure that you always have eyes on your facility, on your hardware, to essentially, once again, reduce downtime. Next slide. So when we look at common customer challenges that we see, the skill and time to deploy is a big one. So like we mentioned earlier, it takes some time to actually get this, the specifications down, to get the design down, to pick the vendors, to go to these multiple vendors, to get quotes from multiple vendors, to make sure it's all shipped to the same place, all time, everything's timed at the same time. The engineering hours to actually configure it. So as you can see, there's many things that tend to pile up there. With the IDC, since it's a standard solution that we've already developed, all we need is a 2-hour call to help finish the design. We do have an IT OT experience team that actually comes in and does the delivery, and that's one single purchase order. So all you have to do is worry about the delivery of the system from one spot instead of your multiple vendors that you'll have to pull in. Another challenge that a lot of our customers are seeing is the desktops that are scattered everywhere. You've heard me mention this a couple times already. So bringing in centralized management, being able to extend that life cycle, like your older operating systems. Once again, quick deployment and also easy replacement. So being able to replace devices easily. Future scalability. It's very hard to scale when you buy a computer simply to sit and do only one thing. Eventually, you are limited to the amount of resources you can put in that computer or server, and you have to usually buy another one to get bigger. So with our solution with the IDC, you are able to actually, it's built to scale, meaning that there is room that is built to grow when we initially size the IDC. That way, you have some room for growth. And also, it's designed to easily be able to slip more resources in as needed to continue growing. So if you start off with a smaller version now, but 2 years from now, hey, I need more storage, I need more RAM, we can help you with that. High availability and backup. So we have been encouraging our customers for years to try to make sure they have at least backups. Backups can be very, very critical, especially if you have a security event. They might be the one thing that actually saves a lot of time into getting the facility back up. Also, being able to have something that's highly available, meaning that if one thing fails, it's able to switch over to another, can also be mission critical. It will reduce downtime considerably, and a lot of this is now automated. That way, you don't have to worry about that. So, a couple other things we've now built into our IDC. Next slide, please. So this is actually a customer testimonial from a customer who has, I want to say, somewhere between 40 and 50 industrial data centers with managed services with us. Just to read the quote quickly here, the IDC is powerful and does many things, but the resources to support these products are decreasing in the plant. The complexity of the systems is increasing, and so is the ability to remotely troubleshoot these systems. Add all these up, the support is a no-brainer. So essentially, as you can see, there's many different things in that comment that we've already kind of hit on that many of our customers are seeing. So one big one is not being able to actually support it themselves. So that's where they've leaned on us. So our virtualization solution is the industrial data center. The industrial data center is pre-engineered solution, meaning that we've already found a configuration that works fairly well with 99% of our customers. We do have this, it does come in multiple sizes, which I'll get into here in a little bit. But the goal of the IDC is to get virtualization to the plant floor with a reduced lead time, also which leads to faster commissioning and fewer skills from your side to actually deploy this. It is a scalable solution, meaning that it can grow. And it is also something that we combine with our support, our managed support, which is our remote monitoring and administration support, to help extend the longevity of the system, as well as give you the level of support that is needed to be able to keep a system like this up and running. Next slide, please. So what is being housed in the IDC? Steve hit this earlier. Essentially any application you can think of that's running on a Windows operating system. Occasionally we do have customers who run operating systems that are running a Linux operating system, but most of our customers it's a Microsoft-based operating system. So with that, just a few things that are inside the IDC. Some of the partners we have: Cisco, VMware, Panduit, Dell, all partners within this solution. And as you can see, when it names applications there on the side, Factory Talk applications, honestly, we love those as Rockwell. I would love for you to have nothing but Factory Talk applications sitting on your IDC, but I'm also very realistic and realize that most of our customers aren't there and are using multiple different vendors. This isn't just a Rockwell, a solution that can only have Rockwell applications. So if you're running another party's applications on this system, they will run just fine. Next slide, please. So when we start to talk about management, what the IDC actually opens up the management to do is not just include the data centers that you see up in the left corner. So you see the industrial data center there, and also you see its smaller sibling in the virtual, which I'll talk about here in a few minutes. But what it does is it actually opens up monitoring and essentially our managed services to the network as well. So when you're thinking the network, maybe that's your static switches, maybe that's your distribution switches. So this one appliance that we are looking to manage can open the window for us to essentially help you with your entire IT styled infrastructure within the OT side. Next slide, please. So when we dig into the two versions of the IDC, we have the E3000 and the E2000. So what is the difference? So the main difference is the E3000 is fully redundant, fully scalable. The E2000 is very similar, can actually upgrade into the E3000. It just has a few more, there's a few more VMware style redundancy softwares that are built into the E3000 that the E2000 does not have. Now, the E2000 is a very good solution that does provide a ton of level of redundancy. And like I said, can be upgraded into an E3000 at any given point in time. Next slide. We have really driven to get these solutions closer and closer together. So just from a starting point, some of the base hardware, as you can see, we are using Dell servers, and the E3000 starts off with a little bit more in terms of storage space. Also, there will be a little, there will be more space in terms of CPU and RAM, just because the system itself is bigger. As you can see, they are both using the same switch in the Catalyst 9300. Those are 10 gigabit switches. From a virtualization standpoint, here's some of the big differences. The vSphere, so the virtualization layer of software that is running on the server itself, we're using vSphere standard with vSAN on the E2000, while we're using Enterprise Plus on the E3000. So this is one of these that, if you look at the next line item, DRS, so Distributed Resource Scheduler, that is an optional add-on to the E2000, where it comes with the E3000, and it does exactly what its name says it does. So it will automatically move things, move virtual machines around the system to make sure that the load is being equally distributed through the different servers. And this never puts one load on a specific server, but also it allows us to separate, say we have from an HMI server standpoint, we have a primary and a secondary. We'll separate those two, so if that particular server fails, we have those two running in different places, and the application can pick up itself and keep going. From a virtualization or from a VM standpoint, I would say it's a rough number of 120 for the E2000 and a rough number for 180 on the E3000. And the main reason here is if you're running nothing but analytics style applications with a bunch of SQL servers, we're probably not going to get 120 on there, just because of the amount of resources they tend to take up. So what we do is we have that conversation beforehand to make sure that it's sized appropriately, to make sure that you can get the appropriate system for you. We can include a UPS. One big thing that we did add is a backup solution. The backup solution is something that we put in by default. It does do backups locally. One great thing about that is that you no longer have to worry about taking those backups to other places unless you absolutely need to, and making sure you have those backups. We've actually had local backups like these save a couple of our customers who unfortunately had malware attacks and things like that. So we were able to help them with that. And then of course the support. Support solution is exactly the same between the both of them. And we can provide that 24/7 by 365 remote monitoring and administration and support. Next slide. So we are in our 3rd and a half generation. It's funny to say half, but this I've actually worked with the IDC since its 1st generation. It has come a long way. Some of the new things that are in this new generation is the Cisco 9300 24 port 10 gigabit switch, and our new cabinet actually has environmental monitoring, but also has a badge scanner on it. We've actually had this similar cabinet at Automation Fair the past couple years, and we never realized how handy that badge scanner could be until we actually were using it ourselves. It's a great way to make sure you are keeping out people who aren't, who just don't need to be within the system, and honestly can cause more harm than good. So it's one of the big things that we added to the system here with this generation. Next slide. Yep. So once again, the physical security of the badge reader, and then also the new 9K platform being provided by Cisco, giving us that flexibility actually for a 10 gigabit uplink, which if we have a lot of traffic, that's great. Also being able to give us that 10 gigabit within the system. That way, from a storage standpoint, the links between that virtual machine and the storage are really fast. So we're improving our reliability and making it easier to maintain. So if you don't need something that big, we do have the smaller option in the Versa Virtual. Our Versa Virtual is essentially designed very similar to our industrial data center. It is an appliance that does have a couple terabytes of usable storage. It does have 10 gigabit network internally and 10 gigabit uplink. So it does still have that fast switch capacity. It is from a virtualization standpoint, as you can see, the 1000 and the 2000 are using vSphere standard. The 2000 actually does use vSAN because it does have multiple nodes. The 1000 does not have multiple nodes. So the big difference between those, besides the core count there, is the 1000 does not have redundancy built into it from a failover perspective, where the 2000 does have that level of redundancy. And this also has, once again, our managed support that is tied to it. Next slide. Yep, so in terms of buying options, we've also been able to split the options into, split it into essentially 2 options. We have our option where you buy it outright. That's an option that many of our customers tend to go. We also have our infrastructure as a service option. With this option, what it allows our customers to do is to spend less money up front to get into virtualization, but also provide that monitoring and admin contract behind it. So essentially, you put a down payment to help start the contract, help procure the hardware, and then from there, Rockwell owns the hardware, and we will then monitor and manage it for you, so you don't have to do so. Next slide. So the idea is to take that outright investment to go out and procure the hardware, and deliver the hardware, and make it an operational expense to bring it down to a monthly cost that you can apply to from the OT side, instead of having to do it as a huge capital expense. Next slide, please. So once again, how does this help? Lowers the cost of ownership. You can now use thin clients instead of costly computer assets, and it gets you that high availability compute and network architecture that you're probably looking for. We can increase the productivity, and by that means, one, now that we have this data center in there, we can slip things in and out as needed, in terms of failover and things failing, but also being able to provide redundancy from a hardware and software perspective. And then the ease of management. Essentially, we are taking the management of the system on ourselves as Rockwell, and then you do not have to worry about managing the system. And so let's start digging a little more into that management piece. So when we look at the management piece, as you can see in this slide, without the data center management, essentially you have to worry about the application and the data, and then all of that stuff in the middle there. So handling OS patching, middleware, and by middleware, that's updates on the servers, on the switches, things that normally IT departments take care of. But from an OT perspective, we have a group of individuals that can provide both the IT and OT style support for a system like this. So what we're trying to do with our managed services is essentially take over that middle part that you see there, and that way all you have to do is focus on your application and the data. Now we do have some backups, or we do backups within our data center, so we still manage some of the backups, but in terms of full-blown disaster recovery, that isn't necessarily intertwined with the support in the data center. Next slide, please. So just a few things that we do with our managed support. So the 24/7 by 365 real-time monitoring and administration. That means if you are calling at 2 a.m., we will have someone there to help. Phone support, and also with most of our customers who do this, they actually are getting the calls from us if we see that there's an issue. So you'll have a designated technical lead and support team. They will do everything from environmental statuses, watching those alarms, to doing OS patches if we've decided, if we've uplifted to OS patches. Say you need a new user created, say you need a new virtual machine created. Those are all things that that our management team will take on and do for you. And we will also have quarterly and sometimes even monthly business reviews to make sure that our support is providing the impact that it needs to be providing. We need to make sure that you're getting the highest level of support from us. So essentially what we're trying to do is limit your risk, make business for you easier. So essentially you are focused on making your product. You don't have to worry about the management perspective. And next slide. And also warranty is also included there. So what we can do from even an enhanced standpoint, we can take this to another level and take on antivirus and patching of your application servers. So these are two big things that our customers have talked about that IT also loves to do. But sometimes they interfere with what we're doing on the OT side in the plant floor and can cause downtime. So our team is very sensitive to that, and we are aware of that. So we also provide these solutions as add-ons if one, the IT department doesn't want to do it and take care of it, or two, if OT really wants someone who is with an OT mindset and IT skill set to take over something like this. Next slide. So to dig into, some of the little things that are also included. So the real-time monitoring, so device health, things like that, alarm status if you get alarms, hardware replacement, service restoration. So if the hardware is, if with our managed services, if the hardware goes down, one, we will make sure that the system is up and running to a point where you can continue to run. And then we will own the fact that our hardware is down and drive it to resolution to make sure we get a replacement in with the system. So some of the virtualization tasks, like I mentioned earlier, so creating a virtual machine, adding a user, needing to do a backup on demand, things like that. All these IT style management activities are now being transferred from the OT's responsibility to Rockwell's responsibility. And so to talk about one big thing that makes us different in this space with our managed services is IT departments tend to, or IT vendors, not IT departments, IT vendors who tend to bring solutions like this to OT customers tend to measure their response time in hours, if not days. We measure ours in minutes. So from a monitoring and administration standpoint, we do have a set of critical alarms, and those critical alarms are alarms that we have deemed can cause downtime. When we receive those critical alarms by contract, we have to contact you within, normally it's 10 to 15 minutes. We consistently contact our customers within 3 minutes. So instead of measuring that time to get on the phone and start with a resolution in terms of hours, we're now down to minutes, and we're under 10 or 15 minutes. This is critical when we're dealing with processes and facilities that are 24/7, that are making things that are very, very high dollar, very critical, where an hour of downtime could be hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. Also, our staff on our support team is a very skilled group of IT and OT professionals. A lot of them have either started in IT or OT and migrated themselves to the middle. So they do have an extensive background in both sides. So being able to understand IT as well as being able to understand the OT side of the fence. This is a global team, so the 24/7 monitoring, even though we do have a third shift here in the US, we do have 4 other monitoring and administration centers across the globe that will be monitoring and managing each one of these systems that we have out there. Next slide, please. So the IDC, like I mentioned before, can be a great foundation for other managed services. So that could extend to managing not only the IDC, but your entire network. We can include the patching of your application servers. It can be the start for your security. I have a customer now who their main thing is being able to drive in an offering that is consistent from facility to facility. That's big when it comes to security. So we're able to use the IDC as leverage to bring in both threat detection and antivirus management. And then also our application support. So this is the next level of our managed support that includes knowing your application from a custom level and being able to support it. So when you call in and you are asking questions about your application and issue you have, the person you're talking to specifically knows your application and the way it's set up. So the IDC is definitely the foundation to expand into a lot of other managed services for customers. And I think with that, that might be the last slide.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Sheldon. That's fantastic information. Really valuable approach for managing those applications and the platforms that they demand. And I want to take a moment to highlight the support infrastructure that we can bring to bear. This is like Sheldon said, a 24/7, 365 follow the sun model. We've got hundreds of assets across the globe, that excel and manage a response time in minutes, like you mentioned, not hours, which is common with those IT-based providers. And just like Sheldon said, those minutes really count when we're talking about production downtime. So with that, please feel free to unmute or chat in any questions you may have, or if you want to talk about these approaches, these services, these products we've talked about over the last 3 sessions, please feel free to contact Chad at HESCO or myself. Thank you for joining. Thanks again to HESCO for putting these together. Really appreciate the opportunity. And I hope you were able to learn something over the course of these 3 sessions that you can take back to your plant and make it more competitive. Chad?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Sheldon, great job. We'll give it a minute or so to see if there are any questions that come through in chat or if anybody wants to unmute themselves. And if not, we'll call it a day, get the video finalized and send it out to all the attendees.
Perfect. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.